to the Divorce Support Club podcast.
I'm the head of the divorce team, and the majority of my caseload is dealing with finances on separation, but I also deal with a bit of children work, and as you know, the office deals with all kinds of issues. And although we call this the Divorce Support Club, of course, people that have issues with children as well, it's everything we talk about is of relevance to relationships, things that change in life. And I'll hand over to Claire so she can introduce herself briefly and tell us about today.
As Lauren said, the Divorce Support Club is here just for Ian Walker family law clients, and we hope to give you something just on top of the legal advice that Ian Walker family law can give you. What we're going to talk about today is communication, and constructive communication in particular. We had a session a couple of months ago on handling a very challenging ex. The suggestions I'm going to give today are probably more useful if you are getting along okay, but you have flare-ups or you have conflict, and it's suggestions how to handle those things. So just a really, really brief introduction. I'm Claire Black, as I think most of you on here already know. I'm a breakup and divorce coach, a master NLP practitioner and a former lawyer. I have two children who are 16 and 14 now, actually 17 next week. And I'm also a second wife and stepmom to three grown-up children, two of whom are married with children of their own now. I'm also the author of Breakup from Crisis to Confidence, and if any of you would like a copy of that, please do just let me know. I'm happy to send a copy out of that. So the aims of the DSC are to help you focus on you and take charge of your life, rather than focusing on your ex or anything that they're doing, to become clear, because knowledge is power, and to reclaim that power for yourself, to see options and choices, and to take positive steps forward, to concentrate and focus on what you can do and how you can begin to feel better and make informed decisions, leading to big leaps forward over time. So straight into communication. There we go. So this is one of the most challenging aspects for many of the clients that I work with. When the person that you used to share everything with is suddenly in a very different role, and you can find yourself in a cycle of conflict, recriminations, you always do this, you never do that, those kind of types of conversations that circle around and around, and both of you are trying to show that you're right and the other person is wrong. Often emotions are running very high, there's a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, increased stress, and that fight, flight, freeze response that we've spoken about before comes to the fore and can make you do things that perhaps are out of character or that you wouldn't normally do if you had time to think. So the strategies that I'm going to talk about today are all about how to take a step back, to stay in control of your reactions and respond rather than react. And the first one, we've seen this before many times, but it's always worth a reminder. The first thing is to really think about what you can and can't control when you're in any kind of conflict with your ex-partner. The things in the blue circle in the middle are what you can control: your words, your thoughts, your actions, your behavior, your ideas, your body language. You can control all of those things. You can't control the stuff in the orange zone. So the other person, whether it's your ex or somebody else that you're worried about your communication with, you can't control what they do, what they say, how they react, their feelings, their attitudes, etc. This was one of the things that made a huge, huge difference to me in the early days of my divorce, was the realization of what I could and couldn't control. And when I realized that I was responsible for my part in our communication and that he was responsible for his part, it made a huge difference. It meant that I was less disappointed when things didn't go the way I wanted, because instead I could come back into that blue zone and think, what could I do differently? How could I have said that differently? How could I have put that forward in a different way? And then to see if anything shifted. Because if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And if it isn't working, try anything else, as long as it's something that you can control. And doing this kind of frees you from the frustration of feeling like you're trying to make your ex do anything or make the other person do something. And it also frees you from the disappointment when they don't do what you want. So the first thing that I always talk about with clients when we're looking at their communication with their ex is, what do you want that relationship to look like in 1 year or in 5 years or at your child's wedding or at any other important point in the future that is important to you? We've talked about this a little bit before. So when I was going through my divorce, it was really, really important to me that when my children get married, we'll be able to sit at the same table. Now, that might not be important to you. What's really important is that you get to what you want your relationship to look like, and it will be different for different people. So that was important for me. But for you, perhaps if your ex is particularly challenging, your goal is to get to a point where you have communication that's only communication that's necessary and nothing else, but that communication is polite. Perhaps if you don't have children, for example, your goal is to be completely free of this person in 1 year and never have to see them again. And that's fine. So whatever your goal is, get really clear on it. And then once you're really clear on that goal, you can keep it in the forefront of your mind. So every time you communicate with your ex through your divorce, either written or face-to-face or any kind of communication, ask yourself, is what I'm about to say or do going to take me nearer or further away from that goal? And how do I want to feel when I look back about what I do and say now? Those two questions can help to focus your mind on not losing your rag, but actually focusing on the kind of the long-term goal here. If you're able to, it can be a good idea to communicate that vision to your ex. Depends on your relationship, of course. So my ex and I, for example, are agreed that the most important thing for both of us is the emotional well-being of our children. And we don't really communicate outside of that. But we do communicate on that, and we communicate pretty well most of the time on that. There's still blips every so often, of course. And you may find that your ex has the same intention. Even if they don't, though, it takes two to be embroiled in a really acrimonious conflict. You can always keep your goal at the forefront of your mind and communicate in accordance with that goal. You can hold your head up high. You can keep your vision alive, even if they don't. And that will, the result of that will be that one of you is doing something different, and things will shift over time. So that's the first important question. And then the next one is to think about your intentions. So I've talked a little bit just now about setting your intention to keep your vision of what you want the relationship to look like in the forefront of your mind. Set your intention to stay calm. Set your intention to respond rather than react. Set your intention for whatever it is that you want it to be, because your intention will set the tone and the pace and the feeling behind everything that you say and do when you're writing or communicating. So it's really important as well to be honest about your intentions, because if you have, let's say, we'll take a moment, let's think about it a different way. Take a moment to think about these questions, okay? Is your intention to punish your ex? Is your intention to hurt them in the way that they may have hurt you? Is your intention to communicate just how angry you are right now? Or is your communication perhaps to win them back? So be really honest about your intentions, and then ask yourself, is that intention really serving me right now? Or is it keeping me stuck? So if your intention is to punish or to hurt, that can keep you stuck in those negative emotions and can be potentially damaging to you and any children that you may have, because it will keep that conflict very much alive. And secondly, have you made any assumptions about their intentions? So I hear clients lots of the time talk about how their ex has only done something to punish them or to hurt them, or perhaps to control an aspect of the divorce, or simply to wind them up. Now, it may be true, of course, but then again, it might not. So one of the other things that I encourage you to do is to notice and challenge your assumptions about their intentions. So some questions that you can ask yourself. Do you assume you know why your ex is behaving in a particular way? Now, an assumption is something that you accept as being true and you believe it without questioning it or seeking proof. So start to actually question why they're behaving in a certain way. So if you think that your ex is perhaps only doing something to hurt you, just check in with yourself. Are you 100% sure that you're right? what else could their intention be? So assumptions. I'm going to tell you a story about a client of mine who was called Caroline. And I was working with her, I'd worked with her for about a year, and her ex-husband wasn't responding to any letters from her lawyer. He had been the one to push the divorce. He had left her. He had moved on with another person. And she just couldn't understand why he wasn't responding to anything. And her initial assumption was that the reason he was doing this was because she was worthless and because for him, she didn't even exist anymore. And it made her feel really depressed and really tearful, and her confidence took a massive knock. And her assumption was that he was behaving this way because he had no respect for her, that she was nothing to him. So when I asked her whether she was 100% sure that that was his motivation, she hesitated. She said, well, I don't really know. So then I asked her what else could his intention be? And she said, well, actually, maybe it's because he's quite a powerful businessman and he has a lot to lose here. Maybe he's actually frightened of this process. Maybe it's because there's a lot at stake. Or maybe, and suddenly a light went off, maybe it's because he's seen me grow in confidence over the last 6 months and he's scared. Now, understanding that and understanding that his intention wasn't necessarily to make her feel small, Caroline saw that she was kind of allowing his lack of response to dictate how she was feeling. She was allowing his actions to control her feelings, and she was getting angry and frustrated because she couldn't change his behaviour. But once she realised that there might be all kinds of different reasons behind his behaviour, she then could look at how she felt, and she could look at what she could actually do to move things forward. She ended up actually pushing forward through the courts because he just wasn't responding at all. So she got clarity around exactly what her options were at that point. But interesting to see that her initial assumption didn't help her, didn't serve her, and to look at some of the other reasons for his behaviours really helped her to then start shifting her own feelings. Another technique that I use a lot in my work is what I call taking a helicopter view. So the next time you find yourself having an argument with your ex about something, give this technique a try. It can be quite challenging, but it can also open up your communication and it can help you to see a different perspective. And perhaps there's a perspective that you haven't seen yet. So we could actually do this now. So if you've got any paper in front of you and a pen perhaps, think of a small example of something that perhaps you and your ex or you and somebody else can't agree on, or that you're worried about a conflict over. Don't choose something really big for now, just choose something quite small, and then jot down a couple of words from each of these perspectives. So from your perspective, what do you see, what do you hear, and what do you feel? What do you believe about what's happening, and how do you see it? And just think through, in this particular example of whatever it is you're thinking of with your ex-partner or with somebody else, what's your perspective on it? So if you're Caroline, perhaps you feel disrespected. Perhaps you believe that your ex is deliberately doing this to wind you up. How do you see it? Perhaps you see it as part of the game that they're playing. Once you've done that, shake that off. Physically shake it off. Stand up, jump up and down, shake it off like this, okay? Get rid of being you, because the next question is going to take you into their shoes. So what you need to do now, and if I had a client in the room, I would ask them to move over the other side of the room to do this. Or if you're at home, you can perhaps move into a different chair. You need to imagine that you now are your ex or the other person in this conflict. And from their perspective, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? You need to really concentrate on being them. So being them with their values, their beliefs, their background, their knowledge. What do you believe? How do you see it? So if we go back to Caroline, perhaps her ex would have said, well, I see a worrying process where I might have to give away half my assets. I might have to give away half my pension, and I feel scared. I don't believe it's fair. And I see it panning out in a way that isn't going to be good for me. Perhaps that would have been his perspective. It doesn't actually matter whether you're right or wrong in this. What matters is that you are looking at it from the different perspective. So just jot down a couple of things about perhaps the example that you're thinking of. And then once you've done that, guess what? We're going to shake it off again. So up you get, shake it off, jump up and down. Okay, stop being them. That might be a relief. And then the third perspective that we're going to look at is imagine that you're an independent, supportive third party and you're hovering above in a helicopter. You can see the two people below, that's you and your ex, or you and the person that you're dealing with. You can see them both. You can hear them both. You can see what they see and hear and feel. What do you notice about those two people in this situation? And what message or advice would you give to them right now that would help? This part of the exercise can be really eye-opening. I remember working with a lady a couple of years ago who was, I think, 2.5 years through a very long, very acrimonious divorce. And she'd already spent £30,000 on the court case to date, and there was a final hearing coming up. And we went through this exercise and we got to the end of it and she said, "Oh my goodness, Claire, I've realised that both my husband and I were so focused on being right that we haven't looked beyond that. We've both been so blinkered that we haven't looked at where we could compromise. We haven't looked at where we could agree, and we certainly haven't considered the fact that our 3 children are living in this house. They were both still living in the house at this point, that we're living in this house and our children have been in the middle of all this conflict for this time. And I wish I'd been able to do this before." And it was quite a powerful moment. And then the court case came up the next week and they settled without the judge having to put his judgment in place. So it can be a really powerful exercise to go through. So those are kind of overriding strategies that I would suggest. And now just some very simple tips for, first of all, face-to-face communication, and secondly, written communication. So face-to-face tips: stop, breathe, think and respond. That mantra that I talk about all the time is so helpful here. If your ex or the person you're worried about says something that makes your emotions rise, take a really deep breath, get oxygen back to your brain, breathe, think before you respond. When you do respond, try and speak from the I, I call it. So I feel, I, rather than you never or you always, because those are like arrows, you know, you're invading their territory with your arrows. So instead of, let's take an example. So you never listen to me, you're always shouting. You could say, when you shout at me, I feel disrespected and I feel a bit scared. Please, could you stop? It's just a gentler way to say things. Of course, if you've got, if you're in an abusive relationship, then some of these, that particularly may not work quite so well. So this is, I'm thinking of sort of your average relationship where things have just broken down, but there's no kind of abuse in it. Always have an exit line. So have something that you can say to get out of the conversation. So for example, if you're dropping your children off, and that's always a kind of hot point, I can't stop to talk. Please email me anything important that you need to tell me. You know, pretend you have a meeting to go to. It doesn't really matter. So have an exit line that you can leave. Also avoid talking about your emotions. So keep things neutral, keep things factual, so that you can, particularly if you're handing over children, keep it peaceful, keep it calm, keep it civilized. A couple of other tips that I've thought of since I made the slide. Imagine that you're wearing a coat with really slopey shoulders. So if your ex says something that irritates you or makes you angry, just imagine it sliding off down to the ground. And another thing that people do sometimes is, before you have to go meet your ex, think of one good thing about them and focus on that. Remember perhaps one thing about them that you like or you respect, and that will help to bring a different tone into the words that you use and what you say. The other big thing when you're face to face is that your body language really matters. And I don't know if you know these statistics, but the words that you say are a very tiny part of what you communicate. So the statistics are that 7% of what you communicate is in the words that you say, 38% is in the tone of your voice, and 55% is in your body language. Now, one of the best examples of this is somebody who's saying sorry to you. You know, if someone goes, sorry, The word is sorry, but the tone and the body language is clearly they're not sorry at all. And when faced with a verbal word and tone and body language, we always go with the tone and body language for where we believe. So just be really careful with your body language, perhaps practice what you want to say, and make sure that your body language and your tone is matching the message that you want to get across. And finally, written communication. So often I speak with people about the kind of panic that arises when an email comes in or a letter drops onto their doorstep. And here's just some quick tips for how to reduce the anxiety around that. The first thing I would say is always to sleep on it. You don't have to reply to every bit of information that comes right now. You don't have to reply to your email right now. Sleep on it. Give yourself 24 hours, the 24-hour rule over there. Give yourself 24 hours to process, to digest, to think about what you want to say. When you're sleeping, your mind is processing all of the information that's gone into it over that day, over the previous days, and it will go through all that information. And you often, or I often find, at least when I wake up in the morning, I feel quite differently about things to when I go to sleep. So try and sleep on it. Don't hammer out a really angry email and press send straight away. By all means, hammer out the angry email, just don't press send. Save it into your drafts, revisit it tomorrow when you've had time to sleep and think. The second thing is to breathe. If an email popping in makes you panic, breathe deeply, get that oxygen back to your brain. Take control of that part of the written communication. So perhaps don't look at your emails. Switch off your notifications after a certain time. I don't know, say 6 o'clock in the evening, so that the last thing you do before you go to bed isn't looking at your emails about your divorce. Some of my clients even set up a new email account so they can keep everything separate. And remember, discretionary engagement. We've talked about this a bit before. You can choose how and when you respond. So if an email comes in and it upsets you, leave it till tomorrow. And then tomorrow, perhaps print it out. Go through it. Put a line through everything that you don't have to respond to. So you don't have to respond to personal attacks, for example, on your character. Put a line through all of those. Get a highlighter and highlight any questions that do need answering. And then you can just go back and answer those. So remember, you always have choice. And then have some guidelines for yourself around how you write. So in your written communication, these, I think I've shown you these before, these were ones that one of my clients came up with a few months ago. He decided that in all his written communication with his ex-wife, who was very volatile, he would be clear, he would be polite, he'd be businesslike, factual, assertive, unemotional, to the point, and he'd be very careful with his language. So he would avoid those you must, you should, you never, you always kind of phrases. And every time he wrote an email, he would put in a draft, and then he would go back to his guidelines and he would look through it and alter it so that it fitted in with those guidelines. So he could feel that he had always been clear and polite and businesslike in his messages to her. So yeah, those are my kind of tips for constructive communication. Some of the other things we talked about in the earlier session on the challenging acts are also useful. So setting boundaries, having a really good support team in place, and perhaps some of the techniques like grey rocking if you have a very challenging person on the other side. But these ones are very much more geared towards constructive communication so that you can work together to try and come to an amicable conclusion. So I don't know if, Lauren, you've got anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. That was really helpful, and it's good that, especially with the people that have come to the series that we've run so far, it's starting to link in with things that we've talked about, which I think is very useful as well. I think it's interesting to talk about that pause, and,
yeah,
and that comes up in a lot of what we've talked about. That not reacting
straight away.
Yeah, whether it's because you need time yourself to think about something, or whether you want to consider what's best for your children, or consider what's best for you, or that you don't want to say something you regret. So I thought that was helpful to kind of just keep certain things which come across as somewhat simple but are difficult to apply. So they seem like a simple thing, but actually when you're in the moment, it's probably the hardest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because that rush of emotion, kind of takes over. So, don't beat yourself up. That's the other thing. Don't beat yourself up if occasionally you lose it and you don't use those guidelines, but and especially if you can come up with a little mantra that's very short and pithy that you can kind of say to yourself, like the stop, breathe, think, respond, or even just stop or pause, that you can practice, you will find that over time it becomes a habit and it becomes much easier time after time after time to put in. But I think the big thing is, especially if you've been in a relationship where you're used to responding quickly to your ex-partner, it's okay not to reply right now. We live in this world where everything's so quick and so fast, and it's okay not to respond now. It's okay to go and get some advice. It's okay to go and talk it through with someone else.
And if you're a person that does have a busy email inbox or a busy text message inbox, it is, as you said, that constant accessibility and instant kind of social media that makes you think, I've got to do that and I want to clear it out my inbox, and if I deal with it now, it's dealt with. But actually, by delaying dealing with it, something may have changed. As you said, sleeping on it often makes us feel differently about things in the morning. And the one thing that I've taken from it when there's been either when I got divorced or in relationships that may be somewhat challenging in your own family, or work relationships that may be a bit challenging, is it's the keeping it factual thing. And it's the whole sticks and stones may break your bones, that if somebody says something to you which upsets you or riles you or makes you really angry or makes you cry, you don't have to respond to that. And but it's a really difficult thing when it's something that kind of might hit a sore spot or hit something that feels really personal to you. And that's almost, I suppose, would you say, training yourself to not reply almost, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it's exactly that. It's training your brain to respond in a certain way. So I've become so practiced at this that, if somebody says something to me that is hurtful, my immediate response is to go, because I've done it so many times and practiced it so often. You can practice these things as well if you need to in front of a mirror. Practice them. Practice thinking. I remember when going to see my ex, and in the early days, almost imagining myself with dignified written across my forehead. It just kept it right in the forefront of my mind that I wanted to be dignified at all times. I'd drive to go and pick the children up and I'd be speaking to myself in the car, dignified at all times. I'm going to be dignified today. I'm going to be dignified, and I would make sure that I had nice clothes on and I put a bit of makeup on and I felt good in myself. All of those things can really help, and they're habits that you can get into. You really can train your brain to respond in those ways and to use these techniques. And when you slip up, don't beat yourself up. Just remind yourself to do it next time. You said something just now that resonated as well, and it was about when emails come in and things might change. The other thing is a lot of my clients have messages coming in from their ex pretty regularly. So I remember working with one lady who had kind of 20 sometimes in one day, or sometimes even 20 in 1 hour. If you reply to all of those every time something comes in, your ex will get used to you doing that, and you'll then feel you have to do that. Actually, sometimes you could save them all up. So if you get, say, 5 emails in one morning, save them all up, print them all out, sleep on it, come back to it tomorrow, and then we'll write one response that covers all of them. And by doing that, you're kind of taking the lead in how to communicate more constructively. Because over time, if you never reply to every single email and you always just reply in one email responding to several at once, that message will come across and they will stop expecting you to reply to everything. And you will then be taking the lead and taking a bit of control in how the communication is working. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's just doing it to your own pace, isn't it? And not being forced in, back to your circle of the things we can control and the things we can't.
Yes, exactly. It's focusing on what you can do, and the steps that you can take. So yeah, and like you say, it's not allowing the other person to necessarily dictate the pace to you. It's taking some of the power back. Yeah.
I've not had any questions come in to me for today, Claire. Has anybody got anything else they wanted to ask? I can anticipate today being a slightly shorter session, if not, because often we've had some questions, but there doesn't seem to be any today. So if anybody's got anything to ask, then please do pop it in.
Yeah, please do pop it in the chat, or in the Q&A.
And I think these sessions are good from a perspective of thinking about yourself and what is good for you. And I think that when you're going through a divorce process, separation process, sorting out financial matters, and if there is children involved or not involved, I think it's important to realize that you've got your own health and well-being to think about, and you're allowed to think about that. And these techniques that we cover clearly offer skills, and you're teaching us skills in lots of different areas, but from a health and well-being perspective, I would hope that people can see the benefit of these techniques as well, Claire.
Yeah, I do hope so. I mean, it just what you were just saying about the health and well-being thing reminded me of the story that I think I've mentioned this in a previous session about the glass. So if this is my glass of water, what do you notice about that glass? Whether it's half full, half empty, doesn't really matter. It's about how long you hold it for. So imagine if this glass is your stress bucket, for example. So I'm holding this stress bucket. If I hold it for 2 minutes and put it down, that's okay. But if I'm holding this glass for an hour, my arm's going to start to ache. If I hold it for a day, my arm's going to really hurt. And eventually I'm going to give myself an injury. So give yourself permission to put that glass down and to take a break and do some of the things that you love to do. Often in early sessions, I get clients to write lists of things that they love doing, and then to stick that on their fridge, and then to pick one of those things every day. You know, do something that you love doing every single day, because you need to show yourself that you're worth that. Those things don't need to be big. You know, it might be have a warm bath with bubbles in it, or it might be buy myself a bunch of flowers, or have a hot chocolate, or now that we're out of lockdown, go and sit in a pub garden and have a pint of lager, or I don't know, whatever it is for you. It doesn't need to be expensive, and it doesn't need to involve lots of other people or anything like that. But please, you know, do something every single day that's just for you, that feeds your soul. You know, it might only take you 5 minutes, but it's worth doing.
And I've always kind of as well thought that there's certain things which you are entitled to have your opinions about things. And something that I like to do is I like to have the paper on a Saturday. I don't have children, so I have the luxury of not having to get up and look after any children. But and somebody once said to me, well, don't you think you're wasting your time sitting there reading the paper? And I was like, no, because I have the pleasure in just chilling out and sitting and doing that. And you may do things that other people don't appreciate what that means, or don't appreciate that's your downtime. And again, I think a lot of it comes back to me is the time. It's the not rushing. It's the giving yourself time to go at your own pace on these things.
Yeah, and giving yourself time to process things. You know, when you're going through a divorce, there's things happening around you all the time. There's new bits of information coming in. There's new requests for answers to questions coming in, and so on. So I think it's really important during this time to take time for yourself, where you perhaps switch off that phone. You don't look at the news with all the stuff that's going on in the world right now, and just take a bit of downtime to just be, to just sit, and perhaps maybe, you know, listen to some meditation, or listen to some music that you love. Anything like that. Read a book, you know, escapism. Get out of the world you're in at the moment and read a book that makes you laugh or tells a story that you love. You know, anything to take yourself out of the situation that you're in right now, and a little bit of escapism every day.
No, thank you very much, Claire. Well, we haven't had any questions in today, but if anybody thinks of anything after the session, then please do let us know. And the only thing from me is to say thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully that you would have taken something from that session. I always do, and really find benefit in the session thinking about other relationships as well as just the divorce or separation situation that you may be in. And please do let us know if there's anything particularly you want to talk about. And that's all from me today.
Okay, so thank you very much everybody for coming along, and hope you're all able to get out and enjoy some of this lovely sunshine.